So I'm going to call this one the history of Mexico. If you look at the video immediately preceding this, it's the history and origins of Aztecs, and I'll put the history of Mexico and Aztecs and Mayans, I guess I'll put this as, or something like that. Now, if you go to the other video, I make a comparison with somebody trying to say that the Mexica were mestizos, and the Mexica was another name for Aztecs, and I kind of show where the leaps of logic and that don't really work, and that I go through the people groups of the Mayans, the Teotihuacanes, and the Aztecs, and their fight with the Tepanecs, which made the emergence, and that Mexico should be viewed as the fact that there's two great warrior cultures, one being the Latins that started out in basically central or more of that in Italy, that we call the Latins now, who then conquered the Iberian and pushed off the Celts, and then after two millennia passed, you had the finishing of the Reconquista, and then this great empire of Spain, which crashed into another great empire. So you had two great warrior empires coming together, and Mexico was born out of those two great warrior empires. Not judging whether it was good or bad or anything like that. Coming at history, I can't just sit around, oh, the Aztecs were evil because they slaughtered all these people. I mean, even if that's the sentiment, I mean, that's not how you view history. You have to stand back from it, or saying, oh, well, the Spanish was wrong, since I don't believe in empires, and I'm against colonialism. Oh, the Spanish were very bad. I mean, it's easier for us to sit here in the 21st century and be all nice and you know, oh, those were bad guys. No, I'm just telling it like it is. Now, with Mexico, and the Mayans and the Teotihuacanes and the Aztecs, these people in particular, things I didn't mention in there, which I think people would try to infer the negative on that. No, the Aztecs were great builders. I mean, a lot of the reason for the architecture of their pyramids is that they were filling in a lake. I mean, and when they got there, it was a marshy swamp, and it was through canals and basically dikes and sluice gates that they harnessed the lake, and filling in the land, they built the great temple complexes with the pyramids, and that they bear a resemblance to Teotihuacan. That's where the idea of the priesthood came down. But it could also be people that Teotihuacanes had fought that went up raiding into the Four Corners areas and then came back down and settled as the Mexica, which they would have known what the pyramids looked like. But they considered that basically Teotihuacan as a sacred site. And I went into the Triple Alliance, but I don't want people to mistake that. And just like I said with, you know, there's the story that's recorded in multiple ancient places about the Tepanecs king and the Aztecs wanting to gain power, and the marriage between the daughter and the son. The Aztecs sacrifice the daughter, rip out her heart, flay the skin, and then dance around in front of the king with the skin, piss off the king. So he chases these people out in this marshy area. Later on, the Aztecs didn't like this story, so they kind of spun it so they could save face and say, oh, it was a dream, and there was an eagle with a snake and a cactus, and you know, and this beautiful lake. But the reality, it's Europeanized reading into things, and that eagle, snake, and cactus would have meant something much different than to the Aztecs. They would have known exactly what these symbols meant and what their implications, and it was more symbolic. And the lake wasn't a great, beautiful lake. It was a swamp. It was the Aztecs that made it a great, beautiful lake. So I don't want people to think, oh, but then that's a bash on the Aztecs. And remember, most people who are Mexican or mestizo aren't not Aztecs. There is the Tepanecs, there was the Zapotecs, the Olmecs, the surrounding Mayan people, which again, as I said, were pretty much the victims of the Aztecs. You had the people up north that were these different groups. So it's so that being a symbol for Mexico, fine. I'm not a guy. I think that story, that legend should be told. That's a good thing, just like Romulus and Remus for the beginnings of Rome. I mean, the Romans didn't want to admit, oh yeah, we had to fight the Greeks, and we got conquered by the Etruscans a couple of times, and we were conquered by them for such a long period of time that we finally we didn't actually win a victory. We just bought them off for such a long period of time until we could get strong enough, and then we fought Tarquinius Superbus, and the peninsula is actually named after an Etruscan princess, Thalia or Talia, and and then, oh no, we were from Romulus and Remus, raised by a she-wolf that came from Troy. But there is truth in that, just like there's truth in the story of, oh, the priest had a dream to move there, or the king. And they did go to the center of the lake. It's because the Tepanecs kicked them off, and these people, even though every indication, both from them, their enemies, and the Spanish of the Aztecs, were that they were a fiercely violent people. Okay, why is that a downer? Oh, well, we shouldn't say that. That might be. I don't know why people have to put their 21st century Western mindset of the world on this thing of that being bad. I mean, they lived in southern Mexico. These were people who had to kick ass to survive. These were people who had to fight. None of us, from no country, from no continent, from no ethnicity, are descended from the castrated slaves that were beaten and broken down. We're from the winners. We're from the people who survived the plagues. We're from the kings, the conquerors. The Aztecs were brave conquerors and warriors. I mean, they were fighters. They weren't just like the 1960s idea of all these southern pyramids of the Maya, and that they need to be peaceful and more communistic, and they weren't warrior-like. Yeah, of course they were warrior-like. That's how they survived in that time, just like the people who settled the West. And they say this very jokingly, and it's okay. They were white racist psychopaths. They shot a buffalo and ate it, and used every part of it, and built houses out of mud or anything that they could, and braved all the horrible winters and summers and drought, and controlled. I mean, went out there, you were weak, you get your ass handed to you, you'd die, and quickly. I mean, people walked beside wagon trains all the way to Oregon. Now, none of my ancestors did that, but you look at that and you go, well, yeah, they wound up killing some Indians, and they were pretty brutal, and but that's how that land was settled and connected, and not even, it's this very modern idea that you can go in and just act really nice and everything, and I'm not putting a judgment and saying, oh, the Tepanecs were so much better than they were, and that they had no idea of human sacrifice. There's no evidence to show they did, but there's no evidence to show that they didn't either. The Aztecs, even for their time, were known to be very violent people, and more so than everybody around them. But how do you think that they made it for so long, and they had such a great empire? I mean, they did other fantastic things, like they got to zero before anybody did. I think zero was already existing there with the Mayans, but they built huge, beautiful places. They tamed a lake, and they were pretty much using just Stone Age technology. They didn't have the technology that everybody else did. I mean, they could smelt gold, and they could kind of use some metals, but it wasn't widespread like it was in the old world, in Asia and northern Africa, and well, even in sub-Saharan Africa, you had the Arab trade and stuff, and Europe. It wasn't. They were still doing these awesome things without even. I mean, compare that to a different Stone Age civilization somewhere else, And yeah, I realize Stonehenge is actually more complex of the engineering work of getting the stones and everything, yes, but they still did some cool stuff. And yeah, I know the pyramids of Egypt were, much more advanced, but these were people separate. You can't judge them by, oh, the Stonehenge people or the pyramids in Egypt. You can't do that. it's not to diss them. I mean, the Mongolians, the Mongol Empire was, I mean, they started out as bloodthirsty, and people thought they were uneducated savages, and it formed a great empire which caused trade between China and Europe, and the Spanish Empire, which conquered the biggest empire on the face of the earth. I mean, that started uniting the world and bringing people together, and the Romans. I mean, where would we be without the Roman Empire? They conquered the Celts and the Germanic peoples. I mean, if the Latins hadn't pushed off the Celts from Spain, would the Roman Empire, there would be no Hispanic culture. There would be no Spain or Portugal, or no Latins. I mean, you'd have, I mean, if everything went as it had been, except without the Latins conquering the Iberian, the people of the Americas would be speaking Gaelic. Northern Gaelic, and they'd look a lot different than they do now. But yeah, the mestizos are mainly a mix of these Latin people and the indigenous people, whether they be Navajo or Mayan or Aztec, and that's where mestizo comes from. They're not, mestizos aren't just a name for the Aztecs, and the Aztecs weren't the same thing as the Mexica. The root people were the Mexica, but they didn't. It's not just equating it, just like the people that we now know as the Powhatan were a Algonquin people, but they weren't the only Algonquin people. There were other Algonquins, and there were Plains Algonquins. They believed the Cheyenne were an Algonquin people, separate thing, and then you had the northern people of the Iroquois and the Huron, which had the same base people, and the Mohawk, which they were from the same base people, but they didn't take up all of that. Iroquois isn't the same as the Mohawk, and which isn't the same as the Huron, and they fought each other. And then when you get more, I mean, even the DNA sequencing, the DNA from the people below the Rio Grande is a lot different than the people above it, because those people actually originated, which was a surprise, in central, basically what is now modern-day Russia, where they come from, which spawned a lot of the North Asian, and a lot of the Chinese, Mongolians, Japanese, those people. And the people in the north came through a southern route, different. So for them to have common ancestry, they have to go back all the way to almost like the basically for what gets called Aryan peoples, which is the what is now basically considered. I mean, if you look at the indigenous people from Ireland to India, that kind of people. But again, these are before the rise of any nations or groups. So we see much different people there, and then even the Eskimos are very, Eskimos and Aleutian peoples are different. These people that they think are just living a few hundred miles away from each other are descended from the same people, and actually the Mexicans are actually closer related to the Russians than they are to people who would be called Sioux or Nez Perce, which are closer related to the Russians than the Eskimos and the Aleuts. So there's many cultures and many peoples and many language groups and many DNA groups and many gene pools that wind up getting encompassed in these areas. So it's I don't like when people try to make these massive judgment calls with history of trying to judge, oh, the Aztecs were evil then, or no, they were good and these people were bad. And relay history as history is, and obviously they were people of their time and place. They were before Christianity. They didn't have the same values as we did. Were they better or worse? I don't think people should pull that crap. Pull that that thing when history is being discussed. The Cheyenne had no word for mercy. In fact, many of these things, mercy and weakness and cowardice were considered the same thing. It was not the same as us. Oh, you have mercy on somebody. No, it's the strong shall survive. That's the time that they were living in. That's the conditions that they were living in. Does it mean they didn't have mercy? They didn't have the capacity? No, of course not. Every human being, whether they're from sub-Saharan Africa or whether they're 100% Native American or whether they're mestizo or whether they're Swedish, everyone has the same capacity for vice and virtue. Genetics are important for certain things, but they're not important in the ways racists want to make them be important. And there are areas that they affect and areas that they don't affect. Yes, there's probably only like 97% that changes between any human, but that 3% is, or even the one. Sometimes people say, "Oh, well, before it was 1%." That makes the difference between man and woman, tall and short, facial features, skin color. But I mean, there's the runners that are in the Olympics are mostly from East Africa. They're not from West Africa. They're not from the Americas. They're not from Europe or Asia. There's a reason for that, because that body type is meant for running. But for a long time, these racists tried to say, oh, well, it's particularly the Europeans that are smart, the Eurasians, and then after a certain period, the genes came out of Asia or were destroyed in Asia, and it was Europe, since Europe was building all the technology. And no, we find out that to be demonstrably false. So these things, if I say, well, it's can look it up. Aztlan is not the four, or the reason why it was the four corners is because the amount of violence and the destruction of the civilization that was there that wound up coming down, and that when the drought came and they couldn't be raiding and marauding anymore, and these people had built themselves into cliffs known as the Pueblo at that time, because they had to retreat up into these precipices, or they couldn't get attacked by these forces. They came back down and they settled around the lake. I mean, then you're saying that they're bad, that they weren't, well, they obviously weren't originally from there. And Aztlan, where they were from, might have been Teotihuacan, but they also might have been using that story so that they could say, well, we weren't the marauders up north, we were from Aztlan, or Teotihuacan, which wound up destroying itself. But another thing I should say is Mendoza Codex and the Codex Rios were written after the Spanish conquest, and they were written under the watching eye of the Spanish. That's why the Dresden Codex is more reliable, in that the Spanish burned all the codices before them. They destroyed them as much as they could. The ones that got smuggled out were only kept safe in Northern Europe, because the Spanish had an agenda for destroying them. The Germans didn't. The English didn't. That's why we have that. Why is it called the Codex? I actually had somebody say to me, "Oh, you're just saying the Dresden Codex." Of course, I have no Germanic blood in me at all. Why isn't Codex Mendoza or Codex Rios useful? And I said, but that was written underneath look at the names. It was written underneath the Spanish. They were they didn't want any revival of the Aztecs. They'd done enough to try to conquer them and subdue them, and they even used the Mayans to attack them. But then, I mean, think of Cortez. He went all the way into Teotihuacan and then left, and then just came back and everything, with all that stupid gold. By the time he got back, the whole place was in pestilence and disease had spread. But no, people shouldn't take the fact that these were warrior empires to mean that they were bad, or to put, if you're putting a negative spin, you're saying, well, that's terrible that he says that they were warriors and that they fought. You're putting your own weird pussy ass American progressive view on it, because these were people that existed in a harsh environment where the strong shall survive. Every empire in history was a warrior empire. They weren't like, excuse me, can we come in and take over your country? Oh, sure, since you asked nice. I mean, no, it was fighting. The Syrians, the Babylonians, the Egyptians, the Romans, the Greeks, Alexander the Great, the Islamic Empire, the Reconquista of Spain was taken by force. The British Empire, the Spanish Empire. I mean, this is not the Nazis took things by force, and then they got their asses kicked by the Allies. And no, that's how you hold land, not with polite words and embargoes and stuff. You fight the people. The Aztecs knew that, and that's why they took over the Tepanecs. So, and not everybody in Mexico is an Aztec, or has even a drop of Aztec blood in them. How do you even know that? I mean, there's the people who are indigenous to there, the people who speak Nahuatl or whatever that language is, and Mayan, that don't consider themselves Mexicans, and the Mexican government's actually trying to take their land and stuff, especially in Chiapas. And they won't identify as Latinos or Hispanics, and good for them. They shouldn't. They're the natives down there. Let them, they're Mayans, let them be Mayans. They shouldn't have to identify as Mexicans or Hispanics or Latinos. If they want to keep their own culture, fine. I don't see why their culture has to be erased. But I could go into the Zapatista fight and the trying to steal the land because it had oil underneath it, and the suspicious things that happened with NAFTA. But yeah, when people try to make judgment calls on, oh, well, does that line up with my morality? Would I want that said about me? And these were ass kickers. They weren't sitting around in a sewing circle drinking tea. The Mayans were strong people, and the Mexicans are born out of two strong empires smacking into each other, colliding. That's where the mestizos come from. But is somebody who's of Arab descent in Mexico not Mexican? Is somebody of Polish descent in Mexico not Mexican? Is somebody of 100% Spanish descent not Mexican? Is somebody who's thoroughly has Hispanic culture but's 100% from Mayan descent, are they not Mexican? No, Mexico is a nation state. Are the black people in Mexico not Mexican? No, they are. This idea of Mexican is a race, or that mestizos and Mayans and Aztecs and Mexica are synonymous. Illinois, Illini, right? That's why we get our name. But not everybody in what is the state of Illinois was Illini. There were Potawatomi, Miami, Menominee, and there was the colonizers, the English and the French, and then you had the immigrants from Mexico and Italy and Ireland and Poland, people's ancestors who've never seen this place. Which I heard, oh, well, Mexicans, we crossed we didn't cross the border crossed us. Well, if you're coming from Oaxaca, you probably have Mayan and Aztec and Zapotec and Olmec blood in you. Not Potawatomi, not Illini, not Algonquin, that is, you gotta be, I stopped short of calling it racist, because these were their own distinct people, and actually genetically particular. They weren't, in linguistically and culturally, and these were not, it wasn't just one homogenous people up and down from the southern islands of Argentina all the way up to, the North Pole. These were many different diverse groups of culture, which not always got along with each other, just like any other groups of people on the face of the earth that had to share the same land. They probably didn't have any knowledge of each other. Fine. Is that a bad thing? It's like saying it's a bad thing because the Spanish and the Chinese aren't the same. Because, hey, it's just a long of expanse, and they're, oh, well, if they're not the same thing, then there must be racism. No, it would be racism to just say, oh, all your cultures don't matter. The Europeans and the Asians, they're all the same. Their cultures don't matter. Differences don't matter. The people in Japan are the exact same as the people in England. No. It's disrespectful to so many ethnicities that were there. So, yeah, I get irritated when people try to make the Native Americans out to be pussies, or, sorry for that word, I usually don't use that word, or people that would cry when trash is thrown on there, or people who weren't warrior. I mean, these were ass kickers. These were strong, brave people. These judgment calls on history really burns me up. So if you're Mexican, you come from two great warrior peoples. Keep that in mind. And you're not Spanish and you're not Aztec. You're both, which makes something different. And you have the resiliency of both genetics, both of them. You've got the best of both worlds. So I don't know where any shame or guilt would come in. I think that's only white Anglo-Saxon Protestants that are from the upper class would ever look down and say, oh, those poor people. Why poor people? It's a great heritage from both sides. I mean, the Anglo-Saxons were eating dog meat in Denmark before, when Rome had these beautiful buildings and aqueducts, and it's where half your ancestry and most of the culture, the Hispanic culture. I mean, the language, religion, the culture. So yeah, if you're Mexican, good. Be Mexican. Be proud of it. Don't deny either part of the heritage. Peace to you. May God save Serbia and Syria. For Aztecs, and I kind of show where the leaps of logic and that don't really work, and that I go through the people groups of the Mayans, the Teotihuacanes, and the Aztecs, and their fight with the Tepanecs, which made the emergence, and that Mexico should be viewed as the fact that there's two great warrior cultures, one being the Latins that started out in basically central or more of that in Italy, that like it is now with Mexico. And the Mayans and the Teotihuacanes and the Aztecs, these people in particular, things I did mention in there, which I think people would try to infer the negative on that. No, the Aztecs were great builders. I mean, a lot of the reason for the architecture of their pyramids is that they were filling in we call the Latins now, who then conquered the Iberian and pushed off the Celts, and then after two millennia passed, you had the finishing of the Reconquista, and then this great empire of Spain, which crashed into another great empire. So you had two great warrior empires coming together, and Mexico was born out of those two great warrior empires. Not judging whether it was good or bad or anything like that. Coming at history, I can't just sit around, oh, the Aztecs were evil because they slaughtered all these people. And, I mean, even if that's the sentiment, I mean, that's not how you view history. You have to stand back from it, or saying, oh, well, the Spanish was wrong, since I don't believe in empires, I'm against colonialism. Oh, the Spanish were very bad. I mean, it's easier for us to sit here in the 21st century and be all nice and you know, oh, those were bad guys. No, I'm just telling. So I'm going to call this one the history of Mexico. If you look at the video immediately preceding this, it's the history and origins of Aztecs, and I'll put the history of Mexico and Aztecs and Mayans, I guess I'll put this as, or something like that. Now, if you go to the other video, I make a comparison with somebody trying to say that the Mexica were mestizos, and the Mexica was another name